Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes while we're waiting on that. Just want to let everyone know that we'll kind of go into a little bit more detail on the format as we go through the introductions. But want to let everyone know that as we're letting people into the meeting, we will be muting everybody for the sake of everyone's quiet enjoyment and ability to follow along with the discussion. When we move into some of our breakout discussions, which we'll explain further in a minute, we will unmute everybody, but when you go to speak, you will need to unmute yourselves. And also want to quickly mention a couple of the other features that we are so familiar with now on Zoom. Want to let everyone know that there is a chat function. Given the anticipated number of people on the call, we will not be able to respond individually to questions and comments that are dropped on there. But we absolutely want to encourage everyone to submit any thoughts or questions that you have, because what we will be able to do is actually record and keep all of that information. So we do encourage y'all to please use that to share, as I said, any comments or questions with us. And also, there's a little button down there called reactions. And if you like what's being said, please don't hesitate to give a thumbs up and second comments. We're going to work through a lot of information in a short period of time today. So any way that we can try and keep our on task and not repeat, we would be incredibly appreciative to that. And lastly, the mute button, if some of you are not familiar, is going to be down on the very bottom left. You'll see a little microphone with a red line through it. That will be what you'll use to unmute yourselves. And then the stop video or start video if you'd like for everyone to be able to see you. So with that, I think given the time, I know we've got a few more people that are coming in, but as I said, we've got a big program we want to work through. So I think we'll, if everyone on the PSC and CCL teams are ready, thumbs up. Should we just jump right into it? Excellent. All right. Well, as I said, want to welcome you all for being here today. Just want to quickly touch on, why the league and the society have really teamed up on this undertaking. And, I think we both, our organizations, really understand the deep intersection between the built environment and the natural environment. And, I think our work is so much more aligned than many people realize. When we talk about character, livability, resilience, these are things that permeate everything our organizations do. And obviously the intersect between our work is pretty massive. We're both focused on the future of our city, and we share a deep passion and commitment for preserving and conserving what we believe is one of the most special and greatest places on earth. And that's what motivates us. And this is also what unites our organizations, not only the leadership of the organizations, but the staffs of our organizations and our membership. And want to thank you all for supporting our organizations and our work and helping us and standing with us as we fight for Charleston and the Low Country. I do want to quickly acknowledge and thank the incredible staffs of the Society and the League. They have put a tremendous amount of work into this project today, but the amount of work that they're doing every day covering the myriad issues that we face is truly remarkable. The ground that these two organizations cover is pretty amazing, and they've done a tremendous job getting us here to this point today. This webinar grew out of a conversation that Laura and I had in one of our sort of frequent check-ins. And, we're increasingly concerned that the comprehensive plan is the guiding document, the vision, the plan for the future of our city for at least the next decade. And we're increasingly concerned by the limited time frame that the city's allotted. Typically, communities the size of Charleston might spend 2 years to do a comp plan. Well, due to the election, the city elected to wait until after the election to begin it. So we were now compressed down to less than a year. And then obviously COVID happened. And so we've taken a 2-year process and it's really been reduced down into a 5-6 month process. And we have a concern with that. We're concerned about its ability to be truly thorough, but also the challenges to public participation that in COVID have brought about. We do applaud the city for reaching out, having a lot of webinars. And so one of the options is for stakeholders, groups like us, to hold our own. And so that is the purpose of today. And we really want to make sure that we capture your thoughts, and so that we can channel that and make sure that it gets to the city and helps inform this. So really quickly, the comp plan required by state law, it covers land use, transportation, infrastructure investment, conservation, preservation, really everything impacting the future of our community. It's really going to direct how and where we grow for the next decade. And what a lot of people don't realize is it actually comes down and it informs really every planning decision and investment decision that the community makes. As our staffs attend just about every single planning commission meeting, every single rezoning, PUD amendment, PUD creation, ordinance revision is evaluated through the lens of the comprehensive plan. So it really does matter. This is an incredibly important document. As you'll see from the conversation today, and if you've had a chance to ever look at it, there's a lot in it, but really the guiding principles are what matter, and then our more than capable staffs will continue to really focus on the details and the nuance. And so here you can see many of the key elements that the plan will cover. So we are excited to kind of walk you through, and with that, I'd like to sort of hand it off to Laura to walk us through what we are working to get through here today.
Thank you, Christopher. And good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Cantrell. I'm the Executive Director of the Coastal Conservation League. And I want to join Christopher in thanking you for joining us today. We're very excited to be co-hosting this, this session with the Preservation Society. As Christopher said, the comprehensive plan is our guiding document for the next 10 years. It's really important. And it is incredibly important to have quality input. That's critical and challenging under these circumstances for reasons that Christopher described. So we're glad that we can gather you together. And what I want to do is briefly explain our process and how we're going to spend our time with you between now and 1 p.m. and make sure that we're all clear on how we're going to proceed. We're going to do a couple of rounds of breakout sessions. This is your opportunity to engage, to provide your input. We want to know what you think. You will have to unmute yourself as a technical matter, again, repeating what Christopher said, when you get into those sessions. So I'll say a little bit more about how you get there in a minute. But we're going to do 2 rounds. The first one will focus on communities and land use and some of those issues that were highlighted in the slide, the elements that are in the comp plan. The second breakout session will focus on conservation and historic preservation. We'll take 20 minutes for each of these breakout discussions, and then we'll come back into the full group, the plenary group, and report out on some of the highlights from each of the small group breakout discussions. We have folks from the Preservation Society and the Conservation League who are prepared to be discussion leaders and facilitators. In addition to that, when you get into your small group, we ask that you identify someone who's willing to be a reporter to come back to the full group and share those highlights. So volunteer, or as a group, recruit someone, draft someone to play that role. When we come back into the full sessions after each of these breakouts, we'll try to take about 10 minutes to share highlights, and that's not a lot of time, so we'll have to be efficient. So breakout group 1, 20 minutes, come back, discuss as a full group for 10 minutes, lather, rinse, repeat, go into the second breakout, do the same thing, 20 minutes in small group, coming back to the full group and reporting out on highlights for about 10 minutes. After that, we will do some closing wrap up, make sure that you are clear about what is going to happen with the input and all the ideas you share and questions that you have. In addition, sharing with you other ways that you can engage in this process. So just a couple more details. When we press the button that will shuffle us all into small group sessions. You can expect a slight delay. You're going to be magically transported by the virtue of this technology, and you will arrive in a small breakout session. And then when it's time to come back to the full session, same thing. There'll be a little delay, but then magically you'll be back in the full session. So I hope that all makes sense. I'm going to stop talking now so that we can get to the fun part, which is hearing what you have to say. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for being here.
All right, welcome back to the main group, everyone. Hope you all had a productive breakout session 1. My name is Betsy LaForce. I am the Communities and Transportation Project Manager with the Conservation League and was Breakout Room 1 leader. Unfortunately, I didn't get any volunteers. Everyone was feeling a little shy, so I'm going to quickly cover what we discussed for our topic. So first of all, affordable housing. Everyone agreed that the term affordable doesn't apply to everyone, and there are concerns specifically in neighborhoods such as Longborough. We talked about the issue on Daniel Island, where developers will say in their plan and be able to tout the fact that there is a mixture of housing types and there's affordable housing options in neighborhoods like that, but still for a lot of people in the city of Charleston, that definition of affordable does not apply. So how can we change that and make sure that everybody has access to affordable housing in this city? There was also discussion around the ballot referendum at Charleston County. If that does pass and is successful, wondering how that's going to help address the issue and bring more stock to the city of Charleston, as we are wildly under where we need to be to accommodate the needs of affordability in the city. There were some ideas looking to examples of New York City and how they use rent control to help with affordable housing stock, and some other well-established urban cities that we could perhaps pull inspiration from as we think about how to address that challenge. Next up, with resilience, this is something that we all agreed the city needs to take a really bold approach to changing the way we grow and develop. So no more building in the floodplain, no more permitting new subdivisions or roads in areas that are prone to flooding. We have all of the data and science available to us from the past 10 years. We've learned a lot in that time. Times are really different, and we need to plan according to what we've learned a lot of times the hard way over the past 10 years. And make sure that for the next 10, we are keeping current and future residents out of harm's way to the best of our ability. But that while we do that, focus new growth and development on the higher ground that's more suitable for that type of growth, we at the same time make sure to maintain that balance of community and nature and preserve our existing natural resources, our forests, our soils, our wetlands that are all serving really important roles to help protect us from flooding. We talked about how the term resilience can really apply to any strategy that will make a city safer and stronger. So a lot of ways that the city can improve that for our communities moving forward. And then with transportation, we heard some good thoughts that the Carter routes don't go everywhere that they need to for residents in the city, specifically on Johns Island, need more access from mass transportation options to get all the way around the city for people who work and live in different areas, and definitely to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, not only in the key hotspots that we showed in our slides, but all throughout the city. So just a resounding need for improvement there. And I'll wrap up and pass it on to group 2.
I was group 2, and we have a volunteer who will be reporting out for us. Tracy, are you there?
I'm here, and I just took a second to come off of mute. Otherwise, I would have jumped on right away. Thanks, Erin. Yeah, so really good points that were shared, Betsy, from your breakout session, some of which, you know, seemed similar in theme to what we had in terms of our discussion as well. So with regard to, you know, affordable housing, there was a lot of conversation around how important, you know, like the working class and the, you know, people first starting out in their careers are to our economy here, especially in the space of like tourism and, you know, trying to help maintain that healthy tourism, you know, aspect of our economy, which helps make the city run in large part. And so, you know, that was the gist of the conversation. It's, you know, how far away do young folks need to go in order to find an affordable place to live? Further, it was pushed beyond young folks, but it was a question posed to the group around, you know, what is it that we actually want to achieve here with regard to the composition of the residents and the community here within Charleston? And, you know, really the answer to that is that it starts with policy. So, you know, policy to achieve the goal of having diverse communities with various different income levels and also ethnicities and also, I think, even kind of sector specific work that people are doing. So, so starts with policy there was kind of the resounding message that we had as a takeaway. I don't know, Erin, if you've got anything else in the notes because you were taking them while we were discussing.
No, I think that absolutely covers it. We did just at the end talk about it begins with policy, like you mentioned, and that, you know, setting up the zoning that would incentivize a type of development that we want to see in bringing in that type of diversity.
Yeah, cool, thank you. The second topic was around resilience, and a lot of focus in that conversation was around the flooding issue and the fact that, you know, that seems to be a major source of concern for the group with regard to how the developers are approaching their projects, what the criteria are and or mandates are for them to think through effective strategies for that. And then also too, from a city perspective, like, you know, what's the infrastructure that's underlying? How can we, you know, perhaps improve that, you know, kind of infrastructure to mitigate the flooding issue that is pervasive here? And we talked about Venice floating on water. And so, like, you know, there's got to be, you know, some sort of new approach, but an aggressive one, as was said in the first group, around solving some of those problems. We touched a little bit upon, you know, environmental impact, having natural spaces as well. I personally, like, I'm downtown and I love it, but I feel like I don't have access to the water, and I'd really like to enjoy that on a regular basis. And I'd like to be able to do a whole loop around the peninsula, either on my bike or, you know, on foot, or have access to the water to drop in a paddleboard. And I know there's places to do that, but it's a little complicated. So it's about quality of life. It's about, you know, mental health. It's about community health. It's about environmental health and making sure those natural spaces are there for all of those reasons. And then the last bit of it was about, you know, the roads and infrastructure and the safe kind of approach to having mixed use all in one place. We didn't get specific about like what is or isn't necessarily working, but, you know, certainly kind of there's some state stalls that are happening here. We'd really love to have some better mechanisms to get, you know, in and out of the city and to the suburbs and all of those things without the congestion and the traffic. And then there was talk about a sinkhole as well, from what I recall. and I have to say, I mean, I came from Michigan to South Carolina, and we legitimately have the worst roads in the entire country. In fact, the governor there got elected based on her desire to fix the damn roads, as she said it in her campaign. I'm just paraphrasing. And, you know, so here it's something that I'm sensitive to as well, is making sure that the roads are safe. The sinkholes aren't a problem for us. But I think too, you know, making sure that the bikes are in a place where they're not going to get run down by, you know, somebody that's not familiar with the area or might be visiting as well. So I think that's all I have. Erin, if you wanted to add anything else.
Nope, I think that covers it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, well, we are group 3 and Deb is prepared to report out for us. Deb?
Okay, I'm unmuted. I'm just going to make a few quick points, and then Anna Catherine, who was taking notes, I'll invite you to weigh in. So on the first question of affordable housing, I think the first observation that is, and it was mostly focused in our group on downtown and the peninsula, is that there really wasn't a lot of affordable housing. There was also a comment on a specific project that the public authority, I guess, has control over, and the idea was that developers might actually take over that project, and a question arose whether or not the public authorities were actually also bound, by the goals and the strictures of the comprehensive plan, because that would seem to go against the goal of the city to have affordable housing grow, not shrink. There was also a question about what seemed to be, a real disconnect between affordable housing and what it seemed instead the city was just intent on building hotels and higher priced housing. The projects that we seem to see approved fall into that category rather than affordable housing. And also some discussion about, kind of the action on the approving of those tends to seem to happen at the BZA and BAR. And there were some questions about whether those boards felt that they had to approve or must approve some of these projects. And Anna Catherine brought us up to speed on some changes in the law in the last year, specifically, I guess, section 54 to 20. That has given more clarity to that and maybe a little more teeth to what those boards are doing, and a feeling that they can turn down some of these projects. And so I think that we also said people didn't really understand totally the process by which projects got approved, and in many cases there were more hoops that developers had to go through than the residents may be aware of, and that could be an area to bring people and the public up to speed just to understand what's going on. On the question of, where am I now? Resilience, there, just echo a little bit that they're needed perhaps through the comprehensive plan to be, kind of a better understanding and a better idea of how the economy of Charleston functions. Wasn't specifically mentioned by others, but obviously, we are very tourism oriented, and that has specific impacts on the city. And are there other ways that we can make the city more resilient by thinking about different ways that we actually structure the economy? Again, there was a feeling that there was, a disconnect between continuing development and mitigation of issues of affordable housing, flooding, and climate change, that we needed to have a great deal more visible focus on land use as we considered new development, and that we needed, better communication from the city and residents, and steps to avoid basically creating further flooding problems, and while we're trying to mitigate the ones that we already have. And we spent a lot of time talking about those two topics, so we only touched on transportation briefly. I think one observation is that our transportation issue and affordable housing are very much linked issues. If people can't afford to live in the city, then they have to drive from places outside the city, and that impacts, obviously, our traffic. And also there was a comment on the use of TIF funding, and that we should be, trying to get a little more muscle in that to make sure that those funds went to mitigating our problems rather than supporting the creation of new ones. And I'd invite you to add to that, Anna Catherine.
That was perfect, Deb. And for the sake of time, I'll pass it on to group 4. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I will wrap it up with giving a rundown of group 4. So affordable housing, one of the points that was brought up right at the beginning was that there's a rapid increase in housing values, which is a big challenge, particularly on the peninsula, and that's putting a stress on neighborhoods and businesses. Something that was pointed out that some folks want to see addressed is that it seems that there's a desire to build new affordable housing while there is not so much of a public plan in place yet of how we are addressing the maintenance and improvements of our existing affordable housing. And there was an idea to create or to utilize non-traditional building technologies and materials to try and have different ways to address cheaper ways to build high quality affordable housing. In resilience, we heard that elevation-based zoning from the Dutch dialogues is critical, particularly on Johns Island and Cainhoy. And essentially, we need to be adopting as policy everything that came from the Dutch dialogues recommendations, and the Army Corps needs to do a better job following those recommendations, and that we as a city need to be taking a more science-based biological approach to address our flooding and rely less on gray infrastructure solutions, and work better with nature to address our sea level rise issues. And to wrap up with transit, one of the points that was addressed right off was, while our mass transit is getting better and is a great resource, the issues of safety of getting from one side of some of our major highways to the other is a huge issue when you are dropped off on one side of the road and you need to get back on the other side of the road to go in the opposite direction where you came from. Johns Island doesn't have any public transit at all, so Maybank needs something. And we also need to be investing more in our shelters, our bus shelters around the area, because that will make it more inviting and usable for folks. And we need to have a better agreement and partnership with DOT to help expedite a lot of these conversations. Wayfinding is important to be investing in for the city, and more connection. Walk and ride your bike on main roads like Harborview and US 17. And I think that my connection is a little unstable, so it is perfect timing for me to wrap it up there. That is the last breakout session, so we will be turning it back over to our next steps. That I think is back to you, Laura.
No, I think we're going into the next breakout session now, and then we'll do next steps at the end.
All right, we'll give it a second. I think everybody's still coming back from the breakout rooms.
Okay, I think we should all be back. So if y'all discussed in your breakout rooms, we're going to take a quick poll about the Greenbelt program, and then we're going to do our brief report outs before we wrap up. So Andy, can you give us the poll?
Hey guys, it says pick two, but I'm only able to choose one. Is that correct? Or am I doing something wrong?
I was only able to select one.
I was only able to select one.
Same.
Sorry, guys. I have it on single choice instead of multiple choice.
I also did one.
Redo.
You can also drop them in the chat.
It wouldn't be a good Zoom call without one little hiccup.
Okay, thank you to everyone putting them in the chat. Looks like we are collecting most of the responses. And while y'all are finishing that up, I'll start again with our brief report out for group one. We discussed with development a lot of similar themes, but primarily the group agreed that for the next 10 years, the city of Charleston should really prioritize hardening the urban growth boundary and making that permanently protected. That's going to be a key piece to preventing additional sprawl and maintaining the integrity of the character of the city. So that's the main topic we have to share from development, along with tied into the other themes, the need to prioritize green spaces, public green spaces, parks, and along with that, natural resources. So we talked a lot about the need to protect our existing tree canopy. Someone called our city a urban forest. I love that term, I hadn't heard it. And talking a lot about the approvals that we see and hear about for grand tree removals that are protected under the city's ordinance, but are allowed to be removed because they were deemed sick or in decline or perhaps even dead, when we know that even if that's the case, those trees are still serving really important purposes and ecosystem services, as we say. So want to put a finer point on tree protection and protection of natural resources. We talked again about the need as we continue to develop for a true mixture of uses. So tying it back to the affordability issue, making sure that various levels of income are able to live on the peninsula, especially if you have a job downtown, and perhaps a solution could be income contingent, rent tied to your job in the area, making sure that you have access to a housing unit that it translates to your income to make it fair and accessible for all. So I thought that was a great idea. On the subject of historic preservation, we all agreed that it's a huge part of our tourist industry, the history. People come here to experience that. So we can't have a historic city if we don't preserve it. We talked about one of the big threats to historic preservation being the cruise industry, the cruise terminal, taking up waterfront space downtown, being the only historic city in the country that has that sort of cruise terminal in the historic district, concerns like that. So wanting to keep that a main point of discussion for the next 10 years. We also talked about cultural resources like heirs property, historically and culturally significant communities like Sol Agree. You know, even if they're outside of the city, how can we think about examples like that and ask city staff to identify culturally significant properties and areas and prioritize the protection and preservation of those in new and creative ways. Thinking about how adjacent developments could threaten the integrity of those properties, flooding and otherwise. So along with the protection of the Gullah culture, we talked about the new African-American museum that's coming to the city. That's going to be wonderful, but really wanting to protect those culturally significant places and spaces and context of the city. So I'll pass it over to group two.
Before we do that, I redid it so that we can do the multiple choice. So I'm gonna launch it again so you guys can pick two.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks, Betsy. I was group two, and I'll be reporting out for us. Real quick on the topic of development, the concept of the missing middle was very prominent in our discussion, and how we just don't have a lot of development that caters to this. And this would be described as people interested in living in smaller footprints, wanting a more walkable lifestyle, clustering houses more around green space. And this really caters to anything from families to retirees. And our city just really does not support this kind of development, but we really should be looking at policies that entice private developers to build like this. There's a lot of studies done on this in the market, and it's a very popular concept, and that's something we should be pursuing in Charleston. There was some discussion about, new urbanism has been done very successfully in our city as well. We do want to be creating environmentally friendly, walkable neighborhoods given the lifestyle demands of current day. And then the question was brought up, we've gone through some rapid shifts recently with people working from home and people being able to work from anywhere. And how do we create spaces where people can work and grow and create community spaces that support that? And then it was very much underscored that there are just too many apartments in Charleston, and we need to slow down on that type of development. And when building that big, developers should make sure that flooding is mitigated and not exacerbated. And the example of what's happening at Broad and Lockwood with the Jasper and flooding in that intersection did come up. And finally, it was made known that residents feel like major developments come up and they don't know the details until it's about to happen. And they just don't feel like they have the chance to make any major changes in that process. They feel left out of the loop, and there needs to be better communication to the residents about major developments. So moving on to the topic of historic preservation, we did have, it was pretty unanimous that we do need to be at least recognizing our historic areas outside of downtown Charleston. Pretty much everyone in the group felt like our historic areas in West Ashley, in the Neck, out in Mount Pleasant, really are of a significance just as much as our downtown areas. Two examples that came up specifically were the Phillips community and the areas in the Neck of Charleston, just outside of where the Army Corps is proposing the wall to be built. And these communities need recognition, and they need our help. They need our voice to be lent to support them. And also it was discussed that in areas like in James and Johns Island, there are communities that are becoming more scattered as infill development occurs, especially African-American settlement communities that are becoming less recognizable. And we need to give them recognition and some kind of designation, working with Center for Heirs Properties, so they are considered in the context of redevelopment that's occurring in these areas. Finally, and I'm sure we may be discussing the poll, but we did talk about it a little bit before coming back to the larger group. And we did hear from a member who has some connections with the Greenbelt program, and just kind of talking about that flood dollars and flood projects are not really the main intent of the Greenbelt program. And it would be encouraged for applicants to apply to the program to seek funding for land threatened by transportation and growth, but with flood mitigation being a benefit of that project. And I think that wraps it up for us.
Deb, would you like to go for group 3?
Sure. Touching first on the issue of development, a lot of comment on the concentration of high-rise development, large residential and expensive projects. And I guess Anna Catherine told us some 19,000 new residential units had been built in Charleston over the last 10 years. And there must be a number of us on our group that were part of the movers here, because people opined that if they had wanted to live in a large, high density, high rise city, they probably wouldn't have moved to Charleston, and that these are changing the character of the city. Another comment was that the city isn't really holding the line on impermeable surfaces. We should be requiring these new developments to use permeable materials that will help with our drainage planning and contribute to holding down the cost of flood control. Specifically in Johns Island, there was a comment on needing elevation-based zoning. and that areas should be set aside for continued agricultural use, that the developments of 400 and 500 houses or dense apartments were inappropriate in low-lying areas. And lastly, that drainage limitations or controls on developers should be aggregate. Another comment that there really doesn't seem to be a comprehensive review of all of the impacts of development, whether that's flooding, traffic, quality of life, and it is really contributing to the degradation of the quality of life in the city. In response to that, it was noted that flooding and traffic issues are actually dealt with by the Technical Review Committee, which is not a public process, and therefore it's difficult for residents to even understand what the impacts are going to be and how that review process is assumed their mitigation. The Jasper process, the Jasper development was given as an example. It got a clean bill of health apparently, but as anybody who's driven down there knows, it is constantly, there are flooding issues there all the time. So that's on that. On the question of protecting historic preservation and conservation in districts outside of the city, people noted that there were real gems throughout West Ashley, and there are definitely areas that should be protected. Also, that we need to incorporate options and expand education on what can be done to promote the preservation of those sorts of sites that many times people just don't know. Also that people don't understand what areas are protected by the city. Johns Island, West Ashley, Cane Hoy were cited as ignoring citizen input, and that there really needed to be a process to bind the city to protect areas that should be protected. Also noted that the protections that we already do have in place are not always proving adequate regarding existing resources. And as we think about expanding these areas, what other tools can we bring forward? Zoning, historic preservation tools, easements, etc. I guess in addition, it was the city was described as a tapestry of areas. It's not just downtown, it's also all the surrounding areas, and that the city could do a better job of listening to residents in all of those areas, and that what is appropriate for one region is not necessarily the best for another. One size does not fit all. And approval should take into consideration what is the context of a specific property or area. And all areas need to be embraced and supported to retain the overall fabric of the city. Broader awareness of distinct character and the value. And lastly, that the size of a development could be irrelevant. You could have a small development that could have a big impact depending upon where it is going. And then lastly,
thank you so much. I'm so sorry. We actually have to skip the very last question here to wrap up. Thank you.
Great. I will be very quick because we have got just 5 minutes left for, so the readout for group 4 has been very similar to the others. No more big apartment buildings everywhere. One interesting one was that traffic and, or the transportation and planning need to go hand in hand, so that we are thinking about how we are moving people around the city with new developments coming in. And an interesting point was that sometimes zoning actually causes bad development because it's over restrictive, and restricting some of those regulations may actually create more creativity. In terms of historic preservation, the idea of establishing neighborhood conservation districts as a tool to create some level of recognition and protection that might not be exclusively about creating historic districts was an idea that came up, and in the Upper Peninsula only demolition is reviewed but nothing else, and so preserving the character was considered important. And then fortifying the urban growth boundary, protecting land that are low elevations for resilience purposes, like around Burden Creek on Johns Island, and reinvigorating the urban corridor, like the potential U-Haul the U-Haul property as potential acquisition in the city, and utilizing, creating small pocket parks were ideas that came out of our Greenbelt one. And with that, I will turn it over to Laura to wrap things up.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks again, everyone, for spending your lunchtime hour and change with us. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your vision for a stronger, safer Charleston as we grow into the next decade. And we want to remind you that the conversation doesn't stop here. We would love to hear any additional thoughts that you have, topics that we didn't get to that you want to talk about more, or things that occurred to you that you wish you'd said that you didn't think of. We're here. Please use our organizations as a resource, and don't hesitate to reach out to us as this process continues. We'd love to continue to help get your voice into the process. We will be compiling the input, the very rich discussion that we've had today, the wonderful ideas we've heard, and sharing those with city staff. And as they go into their next phase of the process, which is their data analysis, this will be very helpful to them. And we will keep you posted. Stay tuned for more information about the process as it continues through the end of the year and into early 2021. I want to thank Council members Carol Jackson and Ross Appel for being here. Thank you for your leadership and for joining us today. Thank you also to Planning Commissioner Donna Jacobs. We appreciate you being here. And a special thank you to all of you for your commitment to our community. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.